Part 1. The depth that rode beside them. They sold the West as if it were a round trip. Posters promised wages, wide skies, and the kind of freedom a man could carry home like a medal. Ride for a season, they said, and then you'll be back on your mama's porch with silver in your pocket. But the trail had other plans. It liked to keep what it touched. Cowboys left towns with names and parents. They arrived on the plains as ledger lines, bedrolls, and shadows that stretched longer than their pay. The first rope wasn't a lasso, it was debt. The outfit advanced you everything: saddle, slicker, boots, cartridges, even the horse you sat on. We'll square it in Dodge, the boss said. You signed the paper because you had no choice. Every mile after that, the bill grew heavier. Coffee cups broke, cinch straps snapped, ponies went lame, and every loss stamped itself with 3 words: deduct from pay. When payday finally came, the trail boss produced a sheet that owed you less than nothing. Board, horseshoeing, taxi here, you ate the beans, boy. Beans don't count as charity, they count as inventory. Your stomach had been a receipt the whole time, and nobody told you. The company store followed you everywhere, even if it was just a wagon with a measuring cup. Need tobacco? On the book. Need socks? On the book. Lost your hat to the Kansas wind? On the book. They didn't need to charge interest. The delay was its own tax. Just one more season. You told yourself, one more drive, then I'll be home. The trail nodded politely and whispered, sure, son, while it kept you another year. Cards were the second rope. Towns after a hard drive glittered like mercy itself. A saloon piano could pry open a man's ribs and pour music straight into his bones. Even men who swore off gambling sat down for just 2 hands. House rules were cruel but simple. If you won, you bought drinks. If you lost, you bought winter. More than one cowboy traded his train fare east for a few seconds of bad luck. On green felt, stampedes, storms, and accidents also kept the bill running. A midnight rush ruined saddles and killed cattle. Guess who paid? A river crossing swallowed your blankets deducted. A greenhorn's wild throw tore your palm. Ride anyway, said the boss. The outfit always found a way to keep you even when you wanted to leave. And the job itself, it was less hero than keeper of problems. You patched fences 20 miles from town, fixed wire with hands that forgot softness, and dreamed of letters that took weeks to arrive. By the time news reached you, it was already old. Home turned into rumor, something you almost believed in but never quite touched. The ranch never forgot a number. 30 a month and found, they said. But found meant beans, coffee, and a stiff back. 30 was just a story on paper. Railroads called the line to Kansas City a miracle. The ticket window called it $22. That might as well have been 22 mountains when your pay vanished into deductions. So you promised yourself, one more season. Drive the herd north, sell them fat, get the bonus. Then the herd came thin. The buyer frowned. The bonus shrank, and your road home turned into a circle. Some men did go home. They bought the ticket, shook the dust out of their mustaches, and waved goodbye. But notice how no one remembers their names. The West remembers the ones who stayed, and the ones who meant to leave but didn't, and the ones who wrote letters that never got mailed. The rest disappeared into timetables like cattle into fog. The truth is simple and heavy. Most cowboys never went home because the West made leaving more expensive than staying. Debt, luck, storms, and silence, they were the toll keepers on the only road east. And most men rode in circles, telling themselves, next year, for sure. But next year always looked like the same horizon, stretched just far enough to keep them going. Part 2. Illness wrote the West in their bones. The trail didn't need bullets to thin a crew. It had weather, water, and the stubborn human body. Fever was the quiet foreman. A man could ride 40 miles on grit and habit, then fold by the fire with a cough that sounded like a screen door. In a dust storm, the West sent invoices through. The lungs, spring pneumonia, winter consumption, August heat that cooked a man from the inside out. No villain, no duel, just a blanket, a tin cup, and the sound of cattle breathing like waves in the dark. Water made promises and kept very few. Creeks glittered friendly, then slipped a stomach ache into your gut that outworked any shovel in camp. Dysentery didn't announce itself. It just took a man's strength by inches the way Russ takes offense. The cook swore by boiling. The boys swore by whiskey. Truth swore by time, and time was stingy. Ride sick, or fall behind. Fall behind, or lose the job. Those were the options printed on a sky-wide poster you couldn't tear down. Horses were angels with opinions. A bronc could pitch you into a lesson you'd remember every time it rained. Prairie dog holds twisted ankles that never quite forgave you. You learned to read ground the way a banker reads columns, slow and suspicious. A midnight stampede was a black ocean with hooves for waves. You rode into it because your friends were in there, and you figured you counted as a friend, too. Dawn had a way of turning roll call into arithmetic. The country kept what it liked. Snakes were less dramatic than the dime novels promised. Most bites were warning taps. Still, a man who woke to fangs in his boot learned to shake leather like a preacher. Shakes sin from a Sunday crowd. You cut the boot, prayed, and kept moving. The nearest doctor was a rumor half a day away. Infection loved a busy man. A spur rub, a cactus spine, a rope burn hidden under a glove. Each small thing wrote its letter and your bloodstream delivered it everywhere, right on time. Winter did not negotiate. Wind crossed your bones and signed its name in ice. You learned the math of sweat in November. Work too hard and you buy a chill that lasts all day. Toes went numb and stayed that way. Men who planned to go home at Christmas woke up married to a line camp stove that never quite won its fights. There's a special tired that settles in when fire is work and water is a chore. It sits in your shoulders like a debt you can't pay with cash. Lonely is an illness. Night Guard taught you every star by its gossip. You named a coyote after your sister just to pretend someone was calling back. Letters from home came thin as moth wings. Sometimes you held them near the lantern to read the soft places where tears had dried years ago. The ache that followed didn't make a sound, but it changed how you sat a horse. Some men drifted because drifting felt less like failing. Towns advertised cures by the bottle. Labels promised stronger lungs, richer blood, and a braver morning. Most were peppermint, alcohol, and hope. Good for stories, bad for everything else. Churches offered hymns and a noon out of the sun. Saloons offered a night out of your head. Both tried to hand you your name back for a little while, and sometimes that helped more than medicine could. But the hardest sickness to treat was the simple one, a body used up by honest labor. Rope, saddle, weather, repetition, that's all a year is. You age by rides, not birthdays. Your hands forget soft, your back becomes a ledger of dawn decisions. Home expects a son. The trail builds a stranger who looks like him and talks slower. You plan to introduce them. Then the ticket clerk tells you the price, and your pockets shrug. So some men stayed, not because they loved the work more than home, but because leaving required a kind of strength nobody taught them. It's hard to say goodbye to the only place that understands your silences. Pasture can feel like kin. Anyway, the outfit was short a man. Anyway, the boss said spring works. Anyway began to sound like fate, and fate sounded right enough. Quarantine, when it came, was a rope circle round the wagon and a look from the cook that said don't be foolish. You kept riding in smaller loops, scarf over your face, prayer under your breath. Cattle caught tick fever, and you learned to read a herd's shiver. Men caught something nameless, and you learned how to sit close without touching. Nobody said the word plague. The wind might hear and bring friends. River crossings wrote their own obituaries. A calm fort at dawn turned villain by lunch. Holes hid under friendly water. Current negotiated with no good manners. You stripped down, tied your slicker high, and promised your horse you'd trust him if he'd return the favor. Most did. A few didn't. The ones that didn't rarely offered reasons. Cold soaked through muscle into attitude. Nights after a bad crossing were quiet in a way that made men older. Doctors existed somewhere. You paid cash and left lighter, with a bottle and a list of instructions that all translated to rest. Rest was a city boy's word. The barber was Plan B. Plan C was you, a needle you boiled, and a story you'd tell later like it was funny. It wasn't funny then. It was necessary. Necessity is the West's bedside manner. Cemeteries happen small and sincere. A boot on a stick. Initials cut into a cottonwood. A hat set crown down like a period. No speeches. The country doesn't like to be watched grieving. You swung back, up because there were miles left and a herd that didn't care how quiet you felt. Grief folded small and rode in a vest pocket next to the watch you couldn't afford to wind. Outbreaks came like dust devils sudden, mean everywhere at once. 1 month the camp played cards. The next everyone swallowed carefully and side-eyed. The man who coughed, you shared spoons because there were only so many spoons. You shared canteens because water is democratic. You shared fear because it had more bunks than the bunkhouse. All of it conspired against a return ticket. Illness taxes courage, and courage buys passage. Spend enough of either, and the bridge home starts looking thin. Another season, you said. When I'm stronger, strength doesn't mail itself. It visits workers, stays briefly, and leaves a bill. Poets of the plains were brief. They'd tap a cigarette, watch the smoke write nothing, and say, some folks go home, the rest go on. You nodded because truth doesn't need polish. Under the nod lived a smaller knowledge. Your boots had learned your weight too well. They preferred saddles to train cars. They fit this silence better than your mother's parlor ever did. So the calendar turned without you. You weren't lost. You were accounted for in the way only landscapes can count, by troughs worn smooth, by shadows at noon, by horses that pricked an ear when they heard your step. You meant to leave after the roundup, after the storm, after the boss found a new hand, after until one day the thought of home felt like the kind of road your horse didn't. No, time kept writing. The trail kept the rest. Part 3, the promises that turned into dust. Some men never went home because the law found them first. Not always with a wanted poster nailed to a post, but with a sheriff's fine, a judge's gavel, or a busted saloon. Share they couldn't afford to replace. A broken window, a poker fight, one unlucky night, and suddenly your wages bought county work instead of a train ticket. You shoveled roads, hauled stone, and stayed put while the world you meant to rejoin kept moving further away. Blacklists traveled faster than trains. Speak out against a stingy foreman, quit mid-drive, or question the boss's ledger, and your name went light in ranch offices across 3 states. No one called you bad, they just said, we don't need you. Hunger is persuasive, so you rode south to a sheep camp, west to a rail crew, or north into mining towns. Every detour was a knot in the rope between you and home. By the time you untangled it, months had gone missing, sometimes years. The frontier was a salesman. It sold jackpots, with silver dust in the hills and land that only needed sweat. After a long season of dust and beef, a man was vulnerable to promises of fresh starts. You'd stake a claim with 3 friends and a shovel, dreaming of quartz veins that sang money. Weeks later you had blisters, arguments over invisible lines, and the prickling sense that you'd been conned by your own hope. But hope is a hard habit to break. It ties you down just as surely as any chain. Others married the land in smaller ways. A widow needed fence posts. A school teacher laughed at a poor joke. A rancher's daughter smiled over a church pew. One morning you looked up and realized this county knew your face better than the hometown you left. Home became a postcard address that replied slower than the weather. By then you'd stopped waiting for the mail anyway. The railroad, which promised speed, delivered excuses. A missed train meant another month. A washed-out bridge meant a season. A refunded ticket turned into script that bought things you didn't need and couldn't carry. A man with a horse and a bedroll owned too much for a passenger car and not enough for a fresh start. Travel became math, and math always leaned west. And then there was the truth nobody liked to say aloud. Dying is the sharpest reason men never made it back. Death on the plains was quiet, unromantic. A fall, a fever, a frozen night. A man's hat would sit on the fence for a moment, then the wind took even that. Friends said a few words. The herd moved. Families back east got letters months later. Or not at all. Some are still waiting. Even the ones who lived became ghosts in another way. The longer you rode, the more your old life turned into a third-person story. There was a boy in Ohio, you'd start, and the others nodded. They all knew that boy. He existed in each of them, somewhere behind the dust. When you finally mailed that ticketed goodbye, you worried the person stepping off the train wouldn't be the same one your family expected. Meanwhile, the outfit always needed a hand next week. Spring works, fall shipping, winter feeding, calves in weather that bit harder than any outlaw. Nobility, they called it, but nobility eats. Calendars whole, you blink, and the steer you doctored last year has a calf of her own. Time politely keeps taking its cut before you ever see your share. Gambling tables made sure of the rest. Faro, dice, poker luck dressed like mathematics with a grin. A man could win enough for a ticket in the evening and lose enough to stay. Put by dawn, others won a little, bought a new hat, and discovered that brim carried the weight of another year. The house didn't need to rob you, it only had to remind you who you were. When you walked in. So why didn't they go home? Because the West sticks. A saddle that knows your shape feels like loyalty. A horizon that keeps running feels like a vow. Going home demanded you become the man you were before the dust, before debts, before calluses, before nights spent naming. Coyotes after people you missed. That was a price to high for pockets already empty. Pride was the silent accountant. You could have wired home for money. You could have written, I made mistakes, but the trail taught you to fix what you broke with your own hands. Asking for help felt like cutting your saddle strings in front of the crew. So you stayed, paying interest to an idea of yourself that nobody else demanded you keep. Sometimes papers just went missing. A flood stole your trunk. A fight took your pocket. And suddenly your baptism and your birth date lived only in memory. Memory doesn't buy tickets. Nicknames replace names because nicknames don't ask questions. Dusty, Preacher, Red, they'd buy you a drink in any saloon, but not a welcome at your parents' table. Borders swallowed men kindly. Mexico offered work. Montana offered grass. Canada offered rain. You rode after all three because riding after things was all you knew. Each place meant well. But calendars do the quiet work of erasing intentions. I knew a hand once call him Tim who swore he'd ride east after spring roundup. He even bought the ticket and pinned it in his hatband. Then a blizzard hit the calving pasture. He put the ticket in a coffee tin, rode out, and when the sun came back, the tin held only pulp. He laughed like the sky told a joke, asked later if he missed Ohio. He said, every day, and not enough. Years passed. The mirror started voting. Silver crept into beards, knees stiffened. The stable boy started calling you sir, and you didn't argue. Going home meant facing parents who might not recognize the miles in your shoulders. You wrote again, spring, I promise, and the promise was honest. Spring gives hope and work. One of those always arrives first, and when men finally did return, the tracks often ran only one way. Doors closed softly. Sweethearts married men who stayed. Your stories landed like snow in July out of season, melting before they touched the ground. Some men turned right around and headed west again. Pride, maybe, or mercy. The West welcomed them back without question. Forgiveness is easy for landscapes. Saddles voted. Home lost. Part 4. When the trail became their only home, oblivion wasn't a cliff. It was a drift. Most cowboys never went home, not because they didn't want to, but because the world they left kept moving, and the world they found refused to let go. Names blurred first. A trail boss called roll by nicknames. Letters arrived from men who no longer existed, and the boy your family remembered had turned into someone else while the mail was on its way. Graves told the quiet truth, not just in churchyards, but in the lonely markers along watercourses, the sticks, boots, or scratched initials left behind when time didn't allow for more. A man might pass by and wonder if that marker was his friend's, or if someday it would be his. The West didn't pause for grief. You said a prayer, tipped your hat, and rode on. That's how forgetting began, by necessity, not choice. Myth came in to soften the edges. Songs turned debts into jokes and storms into adventures. Painters added clean shirts where none existed. The myth wasn't exactly a lie, it was an edit. It kept the story watchable. But reality was harder. Men stayed because they'd already spent the tools needed to leave. Money, health, and youth are all forms of currency. The trail demanded them first. There was nothing left to buy the road home. Some men chose to stay. The West was wide enough to start over. A man could stop being the boy who left and become the man who remained. He built a fence and called it a boundary, raised a lopsided barn, or sat on a porch facing west on purpose, watching the sun go down over the same ridge until he knew its moods like family. Homes are built from repetition. The trail had taught that lesson too well. For a few, satisfaction was small but real. A winter with enough firewood, a horse that nickered at one voice, neighbors who returned sugar with stories. The West was harsh, but even harshness carries a heartbeat. Happiness was brief, stubborn, and worth more than gold. But for many, the ending was quieter. They always planned to go after the herd shipped, after the storm passed, after the foreman hired another hand, after became a calendar word. Spring turned to spring again. They folded the ticket they never bought, straightened the hat they did, and rode out into the same valley with older knees. One day, the land simply kept them like it keeps rivers, by letting them go, but remembering the path. What did the West do with these men? It archived them, in brand books, in day wages, in songs nobody sings straight anymore. They became part of place, a kind of immortality that doesn't write letters. Back home, chairs at supper tables stayed empty until someone else filled them. Life, practical as always, moved on. So why did most cowboys never go home? You can blame sickness. You can blame debt, jails, trains, weather. You can blame pride, silence, habit. None of those answers are wrong, but the truest reason is heavier and simpler. Leaving required a bridge, and most men had already spent the boards on the road that brought them here. If you ride out there today, and some still do, you can still see the evidence. A fence staple rusting on a post, a spoon polished thin by hands long gone, initials carved into a cottonwood tree, patched decades later by a younger knife that somehow knew the older hand. The land remembers. The trail is a memory palace with no roof. Maybe that's the final truth. The West keeps what it loves, and it loves men who keep moving. Home asks for rival. The trail asks for endurance. Most cowboys couldn't give both what they demanded, so they chose the one that matched their boots, their hearts, and their hard-won stubbornness. It wasn't romance. It was momentum, a horizon. Teaches you how to live with distance and call it home. And in the end, that's where most cowboys stayed, not lost, not forgotten, but absorbed. Not in their families' parlors, but in the hush after a herd beds down, in the last light spinning on a windmill, in the silence of a trail that never quite ends. So when someone asks you why most cowboys never went home, you can tell them what the old hands told the new. Pick a star, ride toward it. If you make it, that's home. If you don't, this will be.